Good morning.
Good morning.
Good afternoon if anyone from Europe is looking into good afternoon. Did you enjoy Genzoe?
Yes.
I did very much so. One of the comments from the audience, I think it was a Shodo-san talking about listening to Genzoe really stirs up a lot, and I really felt that's exactly what happens to me too. Previously, before we started to stay here for a long time, I used to have to take a long chunk of a vacation from work and keep coming back to wherever Hojo-san was offering Genzoe. And Genzoe was always, for me, a bit like a work manual, because what I hear in Genzoe, I think some people think this is kind of conceptual, but for me it is really more like directly pointing at what's happening in my work and in my life. So therefore, when you listen to what Hojo-san is talking about, actually what Dogen is talking about through Hojo-san's word, I always relate it to what I have been working on, or what's happening in my life. So therefore, it really stirs up so much emotions and also some kind of directions I could go. So at one point, it even becomes almost painful because it stirs up so much in digging in. So that's what was happening to me at this time too. And then I was so happy that Hojo-san in this Genzoe mentioned Eihe Shingi and particularly Chiji Shingi a few times, and pulled out a few of those koans Dogen selected for Eihe Shingi and particularly Chiji Shingi, and spoke about that. It was almost like what I was really intending to do for the next 3 weeks. So I continued to talk about the Koan, the joy of Koan, so to speak. And particularly for the next 3 weeks, I'm going to try to pull out the type of the koans. I really have some sort of long leg. Hojo-san also mentioned something about this is about your life and this is about your living. So therefore, you really need to bring this back to your life and work. Well, life is work. And then you really have to keep experimenting and exploring and clarifying what exactly Dogen is talking about in our own life. And then for that matter, this Eihe Shingi is a very interesting book. Well, how am I going to start with this? First of all, when you're reading Shobogenzo only, you get a very specific image of Dogen as a person. He's very philosophical and poetic, beautiful, precise, but at the same time, sometimes you get this image of a bit like a holier than thou, and also anal retentant. And, you know, very like formatted person. But this is a bit like a pendant piece with Shobogenzo. And when you start to read this, you really start to feel, wow, Dogen is actually quite different from what I thought. Dogen in here is so dynamic, spontaneous, and he's so like shows such a great diversity and virtuosity. And that is because Dogen is really trying to how to say that, incorporate from what he said in Shobogenzo into actual life and actual work. So for a long time, I actually had the impression of Eihe Shingi, Dogen's pure standard for Zen community, was a whole bunch of listing of rules and regulations. I think many people do have that image as well. But as a matter of fact, when you start to read this, you really start to feel, wow, this is not the rules and regulations book. It is really more about case by case by case studies of how you do it, how you function, how you work, in this case, in that case, but strongly holding the principle of the teaching. So I think this is a very interesting book. And then with the New York group, as our group is quite mature, though technically we are all very diverse from age to ethnicity to nationality. The youngest person who came to our group was 8 years old, and oldest was 86 years old. And then we come from all over the world and temporarily live in New York City, that kind of situation. But core members are basically mature people, and in their own life they have the role of either supervisor or administrator, so to speak. Maybe they have the type of the job like supervising job or counseling job, or at home their mother and father and they're supervising children, etc., etc. So I thought out of this Ehe Shingi, Chiji Shingi would be a really good one for us to read. So last 2 years, we continued about almost over a year, reading case after case listed in Chiji Shingi, and it was a very interesting process. So as of today, for the 3 weeks, I have a very limited time, so I may be able to speak about 1 or 2 koans only, but I'd like to try that for the next 3 weeks. Now, this is also kind of important for our lineage as well. What happened was, in the first conversation we had with you 5 weeks ago, I think, in the introduction, I mentioned about this man whose name is Honda Tekifuroshi. When I was looking for a place to go to practice, live and practice in Japan, I spoke with Hojo-san, and then Hojo-san is Okumura Roshi. Okumura Roshi mentioned this place called Myokoji, and it's guided and headed by someone whose name is Honda Tekifuroshi. And then that's where I lived and studied and practiced. And then while I was there, Honda Roshi told me a very interesting story. Sawaki Roshi, as you are studying about Sawaki Roshi's teaching on Wednesday with Hoko-san, you might have heard about this. He stayed in Unsui style all the way through. So therefore, when he's traveling around, he's carrying that Unsui backpack, shall I say. And all of those things you have to carry is really tightly packed in this small backpack. And in this backpack, there's a kind of like a case embedded in here about this size. And this is where you carry 1 or 2 specific textbooks you like to read every day. And so therefore, this must be, I guess for Okumura Roshi, I've heard the story about Okumura Roshi carried Zuimonki to the United States. And Zuimonki was the, well, basically it's like we always have like a bedside table book, in my case, it's Little Prince, but I've carried it ever since I was 5 years old, and I still have one in my apartment. But anyway, Sawaki Roshi carried this, Ehe Shingi. So it was kind of surprise to me at the beginning. But then it really started to make sense, because he's the man of action. He's the man who really thoroughly clarifies what Dogen teaches and then bring it into day by day, moment by moment action. And then that was transmitted to Uchiyama Roshi. So therefore, oh, by the way, if you have this book, wonderful book, The Wholehearted Way, this is the translation of Uchiyama Roshi's commentary on Dogen Zenji's Bendowa, of course translated by Okumura Roshi. Honda Roshi's name actually shows up in page 69 as somebody who followed Sawaki Roshi and Uchiyama Roshi and started to live in Antaiji with Uchiyama Roshi as early as 1960. So he's also within our direct family members. So I just wanted to you to know. And if you don't have this book, buy this book as soon as possible. But anyway, and then so therefore, Honda Roshi also studied with Sawaki Roshi and Uchiyama Roshi, Eihei Shingi. And then when the original copy was running out, he himself also created a budget and kept on creating the original copy of Eihei Shingi and keep giving this to us present students as well. So I also received one, and then I asked his signature, of course. That's my big thing. I always get the signature. So this says commemorating your stay in Myokoji throughout completing the first 100 days. As you probably remember, for the first 100 days, you're not supposed to leave the monastery. So it was kind of very difficult time. So I completed it, and towards the beginning, end of the year, several years ago. But anyway, so this is writing. But as you can see, it's a very difficult book because it's all written in Chinese. And this is the original bounding, so it's on rice paper, and then it's hand-bounded, and it's into 2 volumes. You know, come to think about that, how on earth Hojo-san was able to translate this into this? It's just incredible work Hojo-san also went through. But anyway, as this is so difficult, in Myokoji, that's the name of the temple I was staying, headed by Honda Roshi. Honda Roshi had this routine lecture time, and then we gather and together with him, and he wanted us to read Shuryo Shingi. This is about how we behave in as a group of the people who live in the monastery with each other. And also Fushoku Hanpo. Fushoku Hanpo is the Dharma of receiving food. When we started to read Dharma of receiving food, Fushoku Hanpo, Honda Roshi opens this, and Honda Roshi actually teaches directly out of this original book. It's all written in Chinese. Though he belongs to the generation who are educated to be able to read these Chinese texts, he kind of struggled at the beginning. So what happened was he stops and he says, Issan, go to library, and there's a Okumura Roshi's corner in the library, and pull out this book and explain what it says in English, translating into Japanese. So I was so happy and proud. I went to the library and pulled this out, and I started to explain what it was. And luckily for me, it starts with a quotation from Vimalakirti Sutra, and which in New York group we were actually reading line by line examination. So I was able to explain, translate from English to back to Japanese and explain what it was. So they were like, whoa. So this Eihei Shingi, in many ways, very dear to me, and I hope all of you who are sharing the same lineage will feel the same way. And I'll try to do it now. So first of all, even though I'm trying to put out more cases from Chiji Shingi, the first koan I like to talk about is from Tenzo Kyokun, Instruction to the Cook. So, Chiji Shingi particularly really is a surprising collection of the koan, which is so different from what you had image of Dogen, because it starts with Gautama Buddha telling lies and creating some sort of fake place to guide people. So principle is very strong, but at the same time, how this principle manifests is so spontaneous. And that dynamism is really the point, what the Dogen is really trying to say. And also, this was also a part of the conversation in Genzoe on Busho, but all of this teaching has a long legs and layers. So sometimes I feel, well, I'm very familiar with the Koan, and then I kind of kept it for a long time. But then someday something happens, and out of this very short 5 to 6 lines, some line starts to get kind of scream to attention, like, look at me, look at me. And so therefore, many of those koans are very layered and interesting. So therefore, I like to point out one example of that long leg portion from Tenzo Kyokun. And of course, this is probably the most famous koan everybody probably knows. And this is the one I was kind of having a conversation some weeks ago with Hoko-san. And Hoko-san asked me, what's your favorite koan now? So I said, well, that's the koan I chose for Shuso-san. That's my favorite now. But what was it before? And I mentioned this one. And the reason was not about what's actually written in the first core lines, but actually in the last line. So let me read this again. As you probably know this very well, but it is about rice and sand. So, and I'm also going to pronounce all these Chinese teachers' names in Japanese pronunciation so that I avoid my embarrassment. Seppo was a Tenzo when he studied with Tozan. I just want to add a little more. Seppo loved Tozan. As you probably know, Tozan is the Soto shoes toe. So therefore, Tozan is the basically founder of the Chinese Soto school. A very important guy, not only with us, but also whole, Zen community. So therefore, before this koan, one of the major points it really strikes me is Seppo actually stayed 9 summer angles with Tozan, which means he really loved to study and practice under Tozan for 9 years. It's a long years, isn't it? And then, one day, at this point, Seppo is part of the Tenzo team, but he's really handling, cleaning the rice. While the rice was being cleaned, Tozan asked, do you shift out the sand from the rice, or do you shift out the rice from the sand? Do you sift out the sand from the rice, or do you sift out the rice from the sand? Just in case. Recently, those things don't really happen, but when I was a child, Japan was much poorer, of course, and so therefore, when you buy sand, technology was not that advanced yet, so you always have to look for, maybe there's a tiny little stone, or grounded stone, or sand, you just have to pull it out before you start to wash and cook. So that's something was happening right here in this case. So this is a Tang Dynasty era. So there must be lots of other things was mixed into this rice. But of course, as you hear this, immediately you know this is about discrimination, divisiveness, and rice and sand is of course it's white and dark. So therefore, it is about discriminating good and bad and poor and rich and etc. etc. The discriminating mind portion. But at the same time, this is the shiki portion vis-a-vis ku portion. So, and then utilizing this opportunity, this is typical of what Zen teachers do, always utilizing everyday activity as a portion of the teaching and kind of testing him, right? And then Seppo said, I throw out the sand and rice at the same time. As an answer, it's okay. Because he's talking about that's the discriminating mind, and then I stay away from discriminating mind. But at the same time, it's leaned too much toward emptiness portion. And then so therefore, shiki sokuze ku, ku sokuze shiki, shiki and ku, form and emptiness is just one. So therefore, sometimes yes, you see emptiness portion. Sometimes you have to be on the form portion to function. And as a matter of fact, for us to function every day, you need a form. So therefore, Tozan said, then what will the community eat? And at that time, Seppo couldn't come up with a good answer. He overturned the bowl. So throughout the both sound and rise, which means his understanding of the teaching is still quite conceptual, and it's not really manifested into activity, daily work, and daily function. So this is a famous koan, and everybody knows that. But my portion is here. Seppo overturns the ball, and then after that, Tozan says, later you will meet somebody else. Well, at the beginning I really kind of oversighted it. But then as I go on and on and on, interesting thing is, basically what he's saying is, you and I don't have good chemistry. And you have such a great potential, but probably you don't grow well under me, together with me. You should go somewhere else. And as a matter of fact, he goes to somewhere else, who is Tokuzan. Tokuzan is the guy who beats up people with 30 balls, yeah? And then there, Seppo really clarified the great matter. So this line kept on growing with me. So in another word, to make people grow, sometimes you may have to ask them to leave. Or you may have to actually cut some people off. Or sometimes for you to grow, you have to go somewhere else. It's a very interesting line. And as you go on and go on and go on with Koan studies, there are so many Koans. First of all, we also have this mindset in Zen community, it's a one-on-one relationship. You have one teacher, one student, and goes on to the transmission, etc., etc. And you are so faithful to one particular teacher. But as a matter of fact, when you really examine those Zen stories, it's not always so. That's one of the lines Komaroshi utilized in Genzo. But anyway, there's so many cases, like Rinzai was also, had a collaborated teachers. Rinzai doesn't grow, so therefore someone suggests he goes to some place, and then some place suggests he goes to other place, and you really see teachers are collaborating to make this a great vessel to grow. So in many cases, it really kind of tossed me off, and then really started to see the things differently. One day, this is before 2017, I was sitting here and listening to Okumura Roshi, and it hit me again by something Okumura Roshi was talking. And then I started to say, I actually loudly vocalized it. Oh, so that means I can leave and come here. I had a community I stayed with nearly 10, 15 years previously. And then I was really starting to feel, well, I'm not growing. And then, but I really feel so much to this group of people, and I feel so unfaithful to leave. But then something really hit me with this line and with something what Hojo-san was talking about. Then I had this little moment of decision making, like, okay, I'm going to go back and ask them to, that I'm going to leave and move on to Sanshinji. And that was a really interesting point. Now, speaking about the Honda Roshi, I also had something very similar episode with this line. One day I was Tenzo, and I was working in the kitchen, and then there's this young monk who was 18 years old, was taking care of it at the reception desk. And then there's this really loud, rude, youngish guy suddenly opened the door and started to scream, saying, hey, let me see the abbot. I need money, give me money, kind of thing. And then the temple is situated in the area known to be still having some remnants of a Yakuza group around. So we were kind of, worried. And then this young fellow, 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid, not kid, the monk came to me and said, Issan, what shall I do? What shall I do? So as I was a Tenzo, I was holding Tenzo's wallet, and I knew there were about $300 in it. And I asked another young fellow, 24 years old, come over, and asked, I'm going to ask Hojo-san, in this case, Hondaroshi, what he wants to do first, but just in case, can you stand by, and if I give you a signal, call the police, and in some cases I can just put out this $300 and ask him to leave. But I went into Hondaroshi's room, and Hondaroshi's room is of course a Hojo, it's the name of the room, and then he was studying, and I explained, this may be a Yakuza man, so I could actually call police, so I could give money and ask him to leave. And then he looked at me and he says, no, usher him in. So I said, are you really sure he may have a knife? He said, no, usher him in. Very calmly. And just to depict this a little better, Hondaroshi is 85 years old now. And at that time it was a pre-surgery, but he was suffering from cancer. And so therefore he had lost lots of weight, and he used to be kind of almost chunky. Now he's shriveled up and he's gaunt. So anybody could tell he's a kind of fragile, weak person physically. So I was quite surprised when he said, no, usher him in. So usher this kind of scandal into the room. And then I'm standing by outside of the room, just like there. And then I'm overhearing the conversations. First, overpowering voices from this man asking for money. But eventually, voice starts to overridden by Hondaroshi's voice. Hondaroshi starts to say, now, look at yourself. You have your eyes and ears and nose and mouth, and obviously it works pretty well according to listening to your voice. And you have 2 legs and seems to be working pretty well, and 2 arms and 2 hands seems to be looking really healthy. Now look at myself. Look at myself. I'm 85 years, I think he was 83 at that time. 85 years old, I have cancer, I have gaunt face, I'm shriveled up. Look at me, and look at this temple. As a matter of fact, of course it's a quite old temple. And then when it rains, we have to kind of run around with a plastic bucket to catch the leaking. So he says, look at this. Do you think this temple actually has money? Do you think I have money? And then he started to scold himself, this young man saying, you should go to work. You should actually go get a job like right now. And then he calls me and says, usher this man out and then take him to, I'm going to give him bus money to take a bus. And then give him the address to, those employment center that always belong to, City Hall. And give him the address. So this man, when he came out, he came inside, was like this. And when he came out, it was like, scolded cat. And then, when he was just about to leave, Hondaroshi comes out again. He says, I have $20 in my wallet. I give it to you. Excuse me. Have a lunch and then go to employment center, get a job right now. And then after this man left, he mentioned, this is an evil circuit. Someone has to help him to cut the circuit. So if you just give him money right now, he will repeat the same thing with other temples, or eventually other civilians, regular people's house. Eventually he may get involved with something physical fight, and eventually he may actually hurt people, which hurt him. So therefore, someone has to help the evil circuit to cut off. So I felt, wow, Dogen's teaching, Chiji-shingi teaching, Eihei-shingi teaching is really embodied in this man. So I really felt, gosh, he's really somebody who studied under Sawaki and Uchiyama lineage. So that's the type of the story you find in this. So it's really interesting. And of course, it's case by case and moment by moment. So therefore, next time you see Yakuza man come in, you can't do the same thing. But, the principle is really strongly held. So that's something I wanted to talk about. Now, I only have 15 more minutes, but Next case is something I've been really, how to say that, keep it to my heart and warming it up and fermenting it and make it into delicious miso and natto for recent months. This is so many layers. It's a very interesting case. This comes from Chichi Shingi, and obviously Dogen must have thought this case is really important, so he repeats the same case in one of the Shobogenzo fascicle called Raihai Tokuzui. Raihai Tokuzui is making prostration, gaining marrow of the bone, yeah? And then I'm going to read through this first. With explanation to save time. So after this man, I'm going to pronounce all of those names in Japanese again. Kankei Shikan. There was a man called Kankei Shikan. He was a disciple of Rinzai. And then after he felt he had attained enlightenment under Rinzai, this guy, I'm going to call him as a Shikan. Shikan left Rinzai's place and traveled around until arriving at, this is the major point, a woman's temple, a nun, Myozan, Ryonen. And then he first arrived and he said very rudely, just imagine this guy is from Rinzai. He thinks, I am enlightened. And then he's going to challenge this very well-known, highly cherished and loved, respected woman teacher's place very rudely. Instead of having formal process, he just goes in a very big attitude. And he even says to the person who came to attend him, I'm assuming this is a nunnery, so therefore there were young woman priest came to attend to ask why he came here for. And then he says, if we accord with each other, I will stay here. So which means if I see you are worthy, I will let you stay with here. It's a big attitude. And then if not, then I will knock over your Zen seat. This is a bit like the story I just mentioned. Someone suddenly opened the door and said, hey, let me see the abbot, give me money, kind of thing. But in this case, this is a challenging as my enlightenment. Is your enlightenment good enough to meet my enlightenment, kind of thing? Then he entered into the hall. So therefore, Jisha came to this, abbess, maybe, I should just clarify. And then there's this rude man coming and demanding such a thing. So therefore, this nun, Matsuzan, says, well, ask him if he had come for amusement, which means, this is amusement, is a Hojo-san's translation of Issan. Basically, it's like a teasing, coming here to tease me, or for the sake of real Buddha Dharma. And then, of course, Shikan says, oh, I came here for the sake of Buddha Dharma. I don't think so, but that was the answer. And then, finally, this nun, famous woman teacher, Mo-chan, decided to meet him. And then, so therefore, they started to have a dialogue. This dialogue is a very kind of difficult to translate, but I try, but it's very juicy. First of all, of course, where do you come from? This is the customary question. Where do you come from? And to that, he answers, Okumura Roshi was also talking about this, but the Chinese language is very interesting in this dialogue. He says, I checked with the original Chinese text, and he just says, local. And then Okumura Roshi translates this. I only came from the mouth of the road. But what it means is, there's an entry into the Buddha Dharma, entry into the enlightenment. And then I opened the door into the enlightenment, and from which I came here. So this is like, again, such a big boasting. And then the nun, woman teacher says, again, this is only 4 Chinese characters, but translated as, why didn't you cover it before coming? Which means you open the door, I'm enlightened, but you stink with this sense of enlightenment. There's this very famous word called Zen stink. All of us probably encountered someone like this in the process of years of traveling around, and some people are like, I am so enlightened, and they stink with this sense of me enlightened, right? So therefore she says, why don't you close that lid because you stink? So there's this image of, do you remember before flushing toilet? Probably you're too young to remember this. Before this flushing toilet came, we had this toilet, you just drop in, and then you have to take care of it later. But very often this toilet had a lid, right? And unless you cover the lid, there's a stinking smell always around. So there's an image of you stink. It's really overlapping it. It's a very funny, commentary. But initially I was reading this, and I was reading woman's voice being also very strong. But I think really well, clarified teacher, I don't think they really utilizes very strong voice. I had 2 woman teachers in my entire years of practice, Blanche Hartman and Pat O'Hara. Both of them were very strong personalities, and then when they really have to say something very straightforward, they are very straightforward, but they are very kind and gentle. So recently I'm reading this and I feel their voice. So therefore, he said, why don't you close the lid? Instead of that, she would go and say, well, you stink, you need to take a shower. Kind of voice. And then she says, at this point, so therefore, he was kind of taken back and he couldn't answer anything. And so therefore, after that, he kind of puts himself back up, and then he says, how is motions? How is motions is a translation, but motion is matsuzan. It's a mountain, right? So it's a pond. So how is Matsu Mountain? But this is the typical Zen language of show me your Dharma. It's a bit like a famous story of Joshu's temple. To get to Joshu's temple, there was this stone bridge. So therefore, people always had to cross this stone bridge to get to Joshu. And then when you say, how is Joshu's stone bridge? It means, how is Joshu's Dharma? So show me your Dharma. And then she says, Furocho. And again, it's only 3 Chinese characters. 3 Chinese characters meaning this is who is known, Ro is head or peak. So it's panned with a mountain. Cho is top or head. Ro is exposed, so not exposed. Cho is top or head. So top or head is not exposed. Gosh, I really stayed around this for a long time. What exactly does it mean? There's a layers of this. Of course, as a conversation, she's basically saying, you say you are enlightened, but you really can't see the whole mountain from here. Mountain is a symbol of, entirety, and we, as inside of the mountain, you really can't see it. And of course, as a conversation, it's a kind of challenging between this man who thinks he's really enlightened vis-a-vis he thinks this woman is really diminutive, but as a matter of fact, her teaching is much larger. It's all layered. But I really feel this portion of we really can't see the entirety. And sometimes we really clarify what the Dogen is talking about, what the Buddhism is talking about, but we also have to really recognize we can only understand from my measurement, from my case. So in another word, it's a bit like from this body and mind and my background and education, etc., no matter how clarifying it, I can only scoop with this cup. I cannot scoop out the whole entire ocean. And this portion is very interesting. And then also, which means I don't know. I really don't know. But at the same time, each moment, I really have things to do. So I'm just going to talk about two quickly, as I know the time is running out. Examples which really struck me was, one day I was on call, and then I was staying in a hospice inpatient unit until quite late. And then I was called into one patient, and there was kind of like crisis management was going on, and I took care of it, and I was really going to go home because I really wanted to go home. It was late. It was almost like 8 o'clock Friday night. And then, but I thought maybe I should just check in with other rooms just in case if everything is okay. And in one of the rooms I went in, there was no light, and there was a man dying, obviously quite close to death. And there was a young woman showing her back to me, to the door, sitting on the chair. And then I felt something that I really should be going in. And I went in and I asked if everything is okay, if there's anything we can do. And this woman turns around. As she's sitting on the chair, her eye level meets my name tag. My name tag, I was carrying it on the neck, and so there was it on my chest. And then suddenly, just imagine this is a dark room, someone's dying, and then it's completely silent. And then she suddenly looks at me and stands up and says, "Are you Japanese?" So I said, "Yes, I am." And she suddenly holds my hands and shakes my hands. And I was really kind of taken back because, in this world, when somebody asks you ethnicity, you don't know what comes next, And particularly, I used to work with this organization, which started out as a immigrants support system, turn of the century for Jewish folks. So therefore, even though this serves for everybody, but it's Jewish content is quite strong. So sometimes I meet some sort of conflict between, because of the war. This Indra's net is quite interesting. Something happens and gives a really strong shock wave, and then it just travels and travels and travels until it merges into this emptiness again. But hospice is the last place, receives the last ending portion of the shock wave. So therefore, when I started out, there were a whole bunch of group of people who are, Holocaust survivors, and then eventually it will go into Korean War survivors. But because of the Korean War, there was some sort of traumatic thing goes on, and then people really had a really hard life, and so therefore towards the end they come to hospice. And then there's a Vietnam, and now this one was Chernobyl. Around that time, this is about 15 years ago, we were receiving one after another the Chernobyl survivors. And then also, our location was quite close to New York City's Ukrainian neighborhood. And so what happened was, she said, after they immigrated to the United States, this is also part of this whole Russian Jewish migration. As you probably know, there was such an oppression going on. So almost 100% of the Jewish community in Russia immigrated, 50% to New York City and 50% Israel. And then this particular man was in Chernobyl. And then she decided to become a medical professional. She went to school and she became a RN, nurse. And then so that she would be able to understand what would happen to her father eventually. But she looked and looked and looked all those information, but couldn't really find anything. And what she could find was these documents and also videos, which was available since 1970s about Hiroshima, Nagasaki atomic bombs. Hibakusha is the word we use. So therefore, she was able to somehow make a plan and to see what will be coming to her father eventually. So I thought this was a part of this, ego and huego was part of the conversation. Very often I really can't see, but something happens, something pops up in the form, very solid form, and this connection suddenly crashes. And then at that moment, is there anything I can do? So what happened at that time was she really wanted to know if there's anything Jewish tradition could do at this point, because religion was completely banned in Soviet Russia. So therefore, they really didn't know anything. But after they immigrated to the New York City, she had witnessed her father trying to get into, she said, that building, what was the name? I said, synagogue? So much so they didn't know. And then, so I have no idea what to do, so I really need to speak with someone who knows it. So I said, you mean rabbi? And she said, yes. Do you understand Shabbat is? And she said, no. On Shabbat, rabbis don't work. Rabbis don't actually pick up the call. So I really felt what I really can do right now is just to spend a whole bunch of time and utilizing all of my resources to just call up like hundreds of rabbis I know. And then I found just one rabbi who actually picked up the call. He was in Yonkers, so it takes about 1 hour to get all the way down to downtown. But he was able to come and he was able to offer some sort of information and solace to this family. So this type of event really shows me, I really don't know. I can't tell what really happens. But when something shows up as something really tangible, something graspable, something visible, there's always something we can do based on the principle. I'm going to talk about one more thing. One day I was working, and I was going through home visits in Upper East Side, and each moment it took much longer than I thought. And then towards the end of the day, after 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, I remembered, oh my goodness, today was the day I was supposed to check in with the downtown inpatient unit. So I had to travel, and it was already after 7 o'clock when I got there. And our inpatient unit has an L shape. And then from main entrance, you go right into the nursing station. So I didn't want to go from the main entrance because I didn't want to confront with the nursing station saying, Issan, you are late, kind of thing. So therefore, there's the rear end here. So I was coming from the rear end. And then after passing through 2 or 3 doors, suddenly I heard this thudding sound, and I felt, ooh, what was that? And I went into the room. It was right after this woman took the last exhale breath. I'm not sure if you are familiar with this, but we have an expression saying taking breath, last breath. As a matter of fact, our last breath is exhaling. And sometimes there's this really tension-packed long pause because sometimes people give second and up to third with a long pause. And then in this case, it was obviously the last breath, and then at that time, it looks like her arm fell. And then she had this posture of opening the chin up. So therefore, her mouth is open, eyes are open. It's quite normal. But at the same time, for the people, most of the people don't know how we look when we die. And so therefore, I thought, in case her family come to join to see her one last time, I probably should do this. And there's this 15 minutes window period. After you miss 15 minutes, you can't do this. But for the first 15 minutes, luckily this is right after, you can close the chin. There's a specific technique for doing this, and close your eyelids. So I took care of that, and I went to the nursing station and then checked her document, and I found she's only listing one proxy. So I called the proxy, and I received a very chilly response. And what I found out was this woman was a Holocaust survivor, and she's over 90 years old. But because of this traumatic experience, getting away from Europe, then coming to New York, etc., etc., she stayed single all the way through, and she somehow became separation case. So her only close family member was a niece who lives quite far from Manhattan. So she says, oh, there's no need for, I told her, this is already 7 o'clock, so I don't have to evacuate the room right away. If you like to come and see her once again, you can do so. She said, no, it's not necessary, and I can just call the funeral home right away. And then what I thought was, it's just again immense connection of interdependent net to internet. You know, she comes from all the way. Excuse me. I come from just totally different side, and going through this all this really chaotic time. And then for some reason or another, on that particular day, if any portion of my day took a little less or took longer, I wasn't passing through on the right moment of this woman just dies. Again, this is really like ego and fuego. You can't see, but at the same time, when it meets, there's something you can do. So I thought, and I really thought that this is the best thing to do, is that I stay longer until funeral people will send someone to, remove her remains. So I stayed about 90 minutes until the funeral people came. So, this hurocho, it's just a 3 Chinese word, hurocho. Head, or I would say entirety is not exposed. You can't see it. But at the same time, this is really just moment by moment of cause effect, changing. And at one point, you may actually see something tangible. And in that time, what do you do? So these cases are really interesting. And as a matter of fact, this particular case also carries this particular social issues about not only women's issue, but also LGBTQ issue, racial issue, etc., etc. So I would probably, if I could have 3 more hours, I could unwrap this case. But what I really wanted to deliver to you is that Koans are very interesting, and it has such depth and layers. And so next 2 weeks, I like to keep on talking about some selected koans from Chichi Shinki, particularly those ones I have heard from Honda Roshi, which was a favorite for Sawaki Roshis. So, and then maybe next week, I also like to talk about my favorite historic teacher, Issan. It's not because my name sounds like Issan, but also in Bussho, Hojo-san was also put out several episodes about Issan, so I really like you to feel kind of close to Issan as well. And Issan's story shows up so many times, not only Eihei Shingi, but also entire Shobogenzo. So that's what I like to do next week. I'm sorry I spoke too much time again, and then if you like to, please open the conversation to everybody.
Questions, comments? Anybody in the gallery? Issan.
Hi.
I have a comment and sort of a question for you.
Yes.
It's kind of interesting what you tell me about walking past the room just as the woman was dying. And something like that happened to me once when I was practicing up in Wisconsin at Myoshinji. It was a 7-day session, and it was the second to the last day, and we had, at the end of it, there was going to be a Hosenshiki ceremony. And so we were practicing, and I happened to walk into the kitchen. Nobody had been in the house for quite some time, and the phone's in the kitchen. I walk past the phone rings, I pick it up. It's my sister telling me that my father had died.
Mm.
And so it just seemed so, there were, as you talk about all of this happening, all this cause and effect happening, and then at this very particular moment, why would that be there? Nobody can answer that, of course. But what I want to ask you was, knowing how profound that kind of work, working in a hospice, could be, and it might be a ridiculous thing for you to respond to, but I just wonder what kind or how you feel like that helped you mature as a practitioner, maybe get rid of your own stink.
Oh, as I mentioned in the first day, meeting Okumuro Roshi was, for me it was a meeting, Dogen's teaching was really most impact-making, essential turning point, because how I used to look at the Dharma was really under the influence of Rinzai school. And then Rinzai school's way of looking at the Dharma is basically starts from I, right? I practice, I set the goal, I mature, I get the enlightenment. And then working with the that kind of how to say module in hospice makes no sense. Because in hospice you can really turn this into, there's a plan of care, there's a goal of care, and the goal of the care is what we think good death is about. So this is real, and then so therefore in that case there will be a good death and a bad death. And when you are really in the whole community, and when you are really seeing how we die and how our life is, it really starts to feel, this is very strange. And then so therefore Dogen's teaching really matched with what I had been experiencing. So therefore it really just so organically started to change kind of drastically my stance at work, or how I deal with things. And of course, we work all day, don't we? So around that time, my workload was practically 12 hours a day. So work is my life. So so therefore, when I say incorporating into work, it's really about how I live. Isn't it? Don't you think? So, so that's the only answer I can kind of come up with right now.
That's an interesting parallel, though, with Dharma teaching, because we can try to control what the outcome is for our students, but that assumes there's a good practice and a bad practice, right? Just like there's a good death and a bad death. We think this is a good practice, this is a good outcome for my student, right? So while you're teaching your students, you may also see that parallel. And as somebody who's running a place like this, I'm constantly looking for, what's the optimum kind of output here? What's the best goal? And it's like you can't do that because you're saying, is this a good practice or good death, and a bad practice and bad death? So I think there's a parallel there, right, with what you're doing with people who are dying and what we're doing as Dharma teachers. Because practice is practice, right? And especially in this family, where we have a very interesting kind of unique take on that whole teacher-student relationship, you know, we're not coercing anybody under the cushion. We're saying, we're gonna practice and you can join us if you want.
Yeah.
We got no control over that, right? And nor should we.
I really feel Dogen's teaching is so immediately adaptable to our life. At the beginning, because of those lingo, it does feel a little conceptual. But once you really take it, then you really come to the point, oh, okay, this is talking about this. And then it's so adaptable. And so that's why I always felt coming to Genzo is like receiving work manual.
But of course, the challenge is sometimes we read those instructions and interpret them, right?
Of course.
So how do we read that without our own interpretation? Even when somebody has to unpack it for us, it's very helpful, but still, we want to, oh, it's because, you know, my life is like this because, like, well, okay, but that's my idea too,
Yes,
right?
but this work manual is about the principle and suggesting this principle is manifested so spontaneously and dynamically and moment by moment. So in that case, I really took a lot from
Well, it helps us manage our expectations.
Yeah.
You know, you can't, in your line of work, there was a lot you could do, but in the end, you couldn't have an expectation.
Right.
You know, you could prepare, you could help, you could have systems, but you couldn't have an expectation. And our
Yeah.
practice is like that too, right? We can do lots of things as teachers to support practice, but in the end, we can't have an expectation.
That's one of the Issan's case. Dogen includes into Shinki. I think I should talk about this next week, but very briefly, it is about very mindful and I don't care should be combined. Because on this portion, you really don't know. But at the same time, each moment you do what you can do fully, but without bringing it back into your home and keep worrying about it and losing the sleep. So there's this wonderful case of I don't care, I care so much combined. I think Dogen is just so amazing.
Well, maybe to connect to my work, so
Yeah.
I think I resonate very much with what you're saying about, you know, it's mistaken, it's misleading, it's about us to set up this, the client's going to come through in 6 sessions, we're going to fix their, you know, it's I think it's very kind of egocentric on the counselor side. I agree that it's best to just kind of meet the client where they're at, right, to be kind of letting them encounter you instead of, but at the same time, we're really beholden to insurance and to companies and saying, you know, we actually did, as a matter of fact, accomplish this goal for someone. So to me, this sounds like a sand and rice situation, right? Where we want to have the perspective of emptiness, where, you know, the client's just coming and we're meeting them rather than, you know, and acting on them somehow. Yet we still have to do things in a certain way, right? That's very form laden. I wonder if you have a certain thought about that. Maybe.
Yes, in reality, we spend 12 hours a day fixing and helping. But with the principle of our work is serving. That's the rewarding rephrasing Dr. Rachel Raymond did out of this. I care so much and I don't care, I don't know portion. So, you know, in reality, what I was doing 12 hours a day is helping and fixing, bringing intervention, etc., etc., but held by this sense of, I don't know. So this I don't know portion is service portion, because with this service portion, you are not bringing your skill and experiences and, you know, tools and stuff, but you are just bringing wholeness of yours to this wholeness, including your wounds, but shortcomings as well, and in a very interesting way, my shortcomings actually serves as well. I always felt my you know, low-pitched voice and also volume of the voice, my height being short is such a shortcoming in a regular daily life, but in a hospice situation it really helps because I'm always speaking quietly and people don't get bothered. And I'm always on eye level of the people because I'm so short. So I don't know. Sorry, that's a kind of like a joke, but you know,
I see what you're saying. You're a
Yeah.
little less imposing. You're a little
Yeah.
more
in this
inviting.
I don't know world, everything actually contributes. I think so. But that's a rephrase of one of my mentors, Dr. Rachel Lehman.